Europe. Pierre Beaugrand said, the opportune appearance of mutations permitting animals and plants to meet their needs seems hard to believe. And he says, thus miracles, he talks about mutations, thus miracles would become the rule. Events with an infinitesimal probability could not fail to occur. There is no law against daydreaming, but science must not indulge in it. He says, mutations to be useful, do not dream about that. It cannot be. And Darwinists also have done experiments for more than 60 years on the fruit flies and the bacteria. In the laboratory, they produce millions and millions of different mutations because the lifespan of these, for example, bacteria is very fast, the fruit flies. They have seen thousands of different generations with millions of mutations. They are all failed. They have not been able to show even a single beneficial mutation which would increase the information in the genome. These flies, for example, they couldn't fly, they got blind, they got sterile, and they died because of mutations. Because mutations are 99% of the time harmful, and only 1% of the time they are being neutral. And Allah says in the Quran, mankind, an example has been made, so listen to it carefully. Those whom you call upon besides Allah are not even able to create a single fly, even if they were to join together to do it. And if a fly steals something from them, they cannot get it back. How feeble are both the seeker and the sought. Now, I told you, Campbell and Reed's textbook of biology is #1 biology textbook of the world. In this book, Neil Campbell, although he defends Darwinism, he talks about mutation, defines mutations in this way as thus. A random change mutation is not likely to improve the genome any more than blindly firing a gunshot through the hood of the car is likely to improve engine performance. So basically he says, if you shoot your car, don't shoot it. You always harm your engine. It will never make an engine better. And he says, basically, mutations to be beneficial is impossible. And Richard Dawkins again. On a TV interview, he was asked a simple question. One question. He was asked to give a simple one example of a beneficial mutation which seems to increase the information, which generates new genetic information in the genome. So as you know, basically first I must tell you that according to Darwinism, there has to be trillions and trillions of different mutations, so-called different mutations, which should be beneficial for the millions of species to evolve. That's the allegation of Darwinism. Now, out of these trillions of different examples, he was asked, can you give us one example? Let's see what he says.
Professor Dawkins, can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
And he stops the recording. He cannot name even a single example because there is none. He knows that very well. The reason why he's defending Darwinism against all this scientific evidence is to keep atheism alive. And this is the #1 evolutionist in the world. So basically we have seen there is no evolutionary mechanism. Natural selection or mutations, they don't have an evolutionary power. Nature does not have a consciousness. It is itself is created, and mutations are 99% of the time harmful, and only 1 time is neutral. So that proves us the fact that all the living beings are created by Allah. And question #3, what about the fossil evidence? It is asserted that species evolved to other species by slow-minded variations over billions of years. Then evolutionists have to show us these slow-minded changes in the fossilized examples. For example, they have to show us how fish, how reptile, how bird fossils, pathological, asymmetrical forms, and these imaginary forms are called transitional forms. Of course, if there are no transitional forms, that means no evolution. However, if you look at the fossil evidence, fossil shows us that the species appeared abruptly, complete and perfectly formed. Now let me explain this on an example. For example, evolutionists claim that the starfish evolved into a fish in a 100-million-year-old period. So, if this would be a fact, we had to see half fish, half starfish, 3/4 fish, 1/4 starfish, 90% fish, 10% starfish fossils. And these should outnumber the stable species. Now, if we check the fossil evidence, fossils are remnants of the living beings which lived in the past, usually skeletal fractures. If we check the fossil evidence, these are starfish fossils. Do we have starfish fossils? Yes, we have millions of them. These are real fossils. Do we have fish fossils? Yes, we have millions of them. Do we have any of these pathological asymmetrical forms? No. We do not have a single of these. There are more than 300 million fossils today we have of millions of species. 300 million fossils and no transitional forms. For example, if you check the beagles, if you go back, far back in our time, millions of years or back, we meet the first beagle couple appears all of a sudden with their perfect and complete forms. There are no transitions. Of course, 300 million fossils proves the fact of creation and refutes all Darwinist claims one by one because there are no transitional forms which is required by the evolution. And Stephen Jay Gould, I told you he is the most prominent Darwinist paleontologist of the 20th century, Harvard paleontologist. Jay Gould said the history, although he's a defender of Darwinism, the history of most fossil species include two features, particularly inconsistent with gradualism. He says no evolution. He says the fossils have two features, stasis, which means they never change for millions of years, no evolution, and sudden appearance. They appear all of a sudden in the history of life. Of course, that proves the fact of creation. Please. And Charles Darwin, he knew this, and he gave another concrete criteria. He said, if my theory be true, this is from the original species, if my theory be true, numberless intermediate varieties linking most closely all of the species of the same group together must assuredly have existed. Consequently, evidence of their former existence could be found only amongst fossil remains. So basically he says, the evidences of evolution could only be found in the fossils, fossil evidence, as a transitional forms. And after that he goes on in the same book. And he admits that there are no transitional forms with these words. Why species have descended from other species by insensibly fine gradations, do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Yes, of course, we don't find any transitional forms because there are no transitional forms. Why is not all nature in confusion instead of the species being, as we see them, well defined? But as by this theory innumerable transitional forms must have existed, why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this, perhaps, is the most obvious and greatest objection which can be urged against my theory. He says, no transitional forms, which means no evolution. And the Cambrian Age. This name may not be familiar to you. Cambrian Age is a geological layer which is between 520 million years old and 543 million years old. This is the oldest geological layer where we have the macroscopic, the visible fossils of animals which lived in the past. So basically we have, slide please. Before Darwin gives another concrete criteria actually to falsify his theory again. He said, if numerous species belonging to the same genera or families have really started into life all at once, the fact would be fatal to the theory of descent with slow modification through natural selection. He says, if life started all of a sudden, living beings appear all of a sudden into the life, this would be a fatal stroke to evolution. And this fatal stroke came to Cambrian explosion. This is called Cambrian explosion even by the evolutionists because explosively the living